April 12, 1975. Deep in the Siskiyou Mountains of southern Oregon, two gold prospectors trek through dense forest, scouring a remote hillside near Carberry Creek. The afternoon sun slants through towering pines when a stench suddenly hits, the unmistakable odor of death. Pushing aside the brush, the men stop cold. Tied to the trunk of a pine tree is a human corpse, badly decomposed. A length of rope bites into tattered clothing, holding the skeletal remains upright against the bark. One prospector stumbles back. Nearby, a small cave yawns black in the hillside, its mouth sealed with rocks. The men pry a few stones loose and shine a light inside. In the gloom lie three smaller bodies, a woman, a young child, and a baby. The scene is ghastly and silent. 7 months earlier, a family had vanished from a campsite not far from here. Now they have been found in the most brutal way imaginable. The Cowden family's peaceful holiday had turned into a nightmare. On Labor Day weekend 1974, Richard Cowden, 28, his wife Belinda, 22, their 5-year-old son David, and 5-month-old daughter Melissa set out for a quick camping trip in Oregon's Siskiyou Mountains. It was a last-minute family outing, a chance to enjoy the woods before summer's end. They planned to pack up on Sunday, September 1st, and stop at Belinda's mother's house for dinner that evening, but the family never showed up. When concerned relatives arrived at the campsite, they found everything left behind: keys, wallet, purse, even a half-finished carton of milk, but no sign of the Cowdens themselves. The ensuing search became one of the largest in Oregon's history, yet not a single clue turned up for months. The disappearance of the Cowden family became one of the state's most baffling mysteries, until the grim discovery of their bodies deep in the forest changed everything. To this day, the case remains unsolved and shrouded in disturbing, unanswered questions. This is the story of the Cowden family disappearance. It wasn't the trip they had originally planned. Richard Cowden intended to spend Labor Day weekend working around the house in White City, Oregon. But when the truck he was going to use for hauling gravel broke down unexpectedly, he turned the setback into an opportunity for a family getaway. Richard and his 22-year-old wife Belinda loved the outdoors, so they decided on a spur-of-the-moment camping trip. On Friday, August 30th, 1974, they packed up their 1956 Ford pickup with tents and supplies, and along with their 2 children, headed for the Siskiyou Mountains. They set up camp in a spot near Carberry Creek, not far from the tiny community of Copper. Towering evergreens and the gentle rush of the creek created an idyllic backdrop for the long weekend. Saturday was spent peacefully. The family relaxed under the late summer sun, splashing in the creek and playing with little David while baby Melissa dozed in the shade. Fellow campers later reported nothing out of the ordinary. The Cowdens were simply enjoying their vacation, a young family laughing and bonding in the great outdoors. Sunday, September 1st, was their last day at the campground. The plan was to pack up by afternoon and drop by Belinda's mother's house for dinner on the way home. That morning, around 9 a.m., Richard and little David walked to the Copper General Store about a mile up the road. Belinda stayed behind at camp with 5-month-old Melissa, tidying up and watching the baby. At the store, Richard bought a quart of milk. A few locals saw the young father and son, David trotting to keep up with his dad as they headed back toward the campsite, milk in hand. Richard and David returned to the campsite shortly thereafter, unaware it would be the last morning they would ever spend together as a family. The forest remained peaceful and sunlit as the Cowdens went about their routine. At some point late that morning, they likely changed into their swimsuits for one last dip in Carberry Creek. Only the Cowdens' basset hound, Droopy, moved about the quiet camp, nose to the wind. Nothing appeared wrong. Not yet. That evening, just before nightfall, Belinda's mother grew worried. The Cowdens had not arrived at her house for dinner as promised. She drove the short distance to the Carberry Creek campsite to make sure everything was all right, pulling in under a dimming sky. What she found was an eerie stillness. The campsite looked deserted yet strangely normal, as if the family might return at any moment. The Cowdens' pickup truck stood where they left it. On the picnic table were Richard's truck keys and Belinda's purse, left out in the open. A plastic dishpan filled with water sat on the ground, its water now cold. Nearby, the camp stove was set up and the baby's diaper bag was ready for use. The carton of milk Richard had bought that morning remained on the table, half full and warm. Other personal items reinforced the sense of sudden interruption. Richard's expensive wristwatch lay in the grass, and next to it his wallet, still containing $21 in cash. An open pack of Belinda's cigarettes was left on the table. Valuables, money, everyday necessities, nothing had been taken or disturbed. Everything was in its place, except for Richard, Belinda, their children, and the family dog. Her heart now pounding, Belinda's mother began to shout their names into the dusky woods. No reply, not a single rustle or human sound. Only the murmuring creek responded. Overwhelmed with dread, she knew something was very wrong. She jumped back in her car and sped off to get help. By the time law enforcement officers arrived and swept their flashlights over the site, darkness had fallen. Sheriff's deputies and state troopers searched the immediate area for any sign of the Cowdens. They found nothing. No footprints leading away, no notes or clues, no indication of a struggle. One of the state troopers later admitted that the silent, undisturbed camp gave him chills. That camp was spooky, he said. Even the milk was still on the table. Early the next morning, the Cowdens' basset hound Droopy turned up scratching at the door of the Copper General store, tired and alone. Within hours, a massive search and rescue operation mobilized in the Applegate Valley. By first light on September 2nd, dozens of people were combing the woods for any sign of the Cowdens. State and local police coordinated efforts alongside U.S. Forest Service rangers and scores of civilian volunteers. Explorer Scout troops joined the effort, and eventually the Oregon National Guard was called in to assist. Search teams scoured roughly 25 square miles of wilderness around the campground. They hiked through dense timber and fought their way up and down steep ravines. Searchers on horseback patrolled remote trails, while divers probed the deep pools of Carberry Creek. Helicopters hovered overhead, and small planes equipped with infrared cameras surveyed the forest from above, looking for any sign of freshly turned earth or hidden bodies. Every ravine, thicket, and abandoned mine shaft was peered into. The forest was vast and unforgiving, but the searchers were determined to leave no stone unturned. Despite the enormous effort, not a single trace of the family was found. The searchers turned up nothing. No torn clothing, no blood, no footprints beyond the campsite. The only thing recovered was Droopy, and he obviously couldn't tell anyone what had happened. Investigators were perplexed. Robbery was clearly not the reason. Money and jewelry had been left behind untouched, and the chance of a voluntary disappearance seemed remote. By all accounts, Richard and Belinda were devoted parents with a stable life. They had made plans for the following week. They were not the type to abandon their home, let alone without their car or personal belongings. As days turned into a week, the absence of any evidence was almost beyond belief. On September 7th, The official search was reluctantly called off after exhausting every lead. Still, the Cowdens' relatives and friends refused to quit. They spent their weekends tramping through the wilderness, calling out the names of Richard, Belinda, and the children, hoping against hope to find something. One of Richard's sisters wrote a public letter urging deer hunters in the upcoming season to keep an eye out for anything that could be connected to a man, woman, or two little kids in the woods. The community rallied with prayers and flyers, but there was nothing anyone could do except wait and wonder. Autumn winds blew through the Applegate Valley, scattering leaves across an empty campground. Weeks passed with no answers. The FBI declined to intervene, citing a lack of evidence of kidnapping or interstate crime. Tips and supposed sightings came in from all over, but each one led to a dead end. Winter arrived, and the mountains went quiet under the snow. The Cowden family was simply gone, and their case had gone cold. Then, 7 months after the family vanished, came the discovery that everyone feared. On April 12, 1975, 2 prospectors from Forest Grove, Oregon were hiking off-trail near Carberry Creek, about 7 miles from the Cowdens' campsite. On a remote wooded slope, they noticed a horrible smell and then stumbled upon something unspeakable, the remains of a human body. The body was badly decomposed and tied to a tree with a length of rope. Authorities were called immediately. Investigators arrived and carefully examined the grim scene. The remains, though largely skeletal, were identified by dental records as those of 28-year-old Richard Cowden. Not far away, searchers made an even more heartbreaking find. About 100 feet upslope, they discovered a small cave whose entrance had been blocked with rocks. Inside that shallow cavern were the bodies of Belinda, 5-year-old David, and baby Melissa. It appeared someone had tried to hide the family in this crude tomb. The autopsies confirmed the brutal fate of the Cowdens. Belinda and little David had each been killed by .22 caliber gunshots. Baby Melissa died of a massive blow to the head. Richard's body was too decomposed to determine an exact cause of death, but investigators suspected he had also been murdered at the site where he was found. No firearm or murder weapon was recovered at the scene. The investigation turned to making sense of this nightmarish scene. Early on, detectives examined and rejected one theory, that Richard might have been responsible in a murder-suicide scenario. If he had killed his family and himself, the weapon would still have been nearby, but no gun was found, and he certainly could not have tied himself to the tree. Nor did Richard's character give any hint of such violence. It was abundantly clear that an unknown killer had slain the Cowden family. Seasoned officers were shaken by the sheer brutality and bizarreness of the crime. The whole nature of the thing smacks of a weirdo, admitted Lieutenant Mark Kizar, the lead state police investigator. It was the murder of a young family for no apparent reason, carried out deep in the woods. Whoever did it had left virtually no clues behind. The only hint investigators had was the use of .22 caliber ammunition, a small caliber weapon, often just as a basic ranch rifle, but deadly in the wrong hands. Investigators also noted the killer's cunning in choosing the dump site. The cave where Belinda and the children were concealed was remote and hidden. Only someone who knew the area's secret nooks would think to use it. The location, and the effort to cover the cave entrance with rocks, suggested a perpetrator familiar with those mountains and intent on delaying discovery. In fact, the more detectives learned, the more it seemed likely that the murderer wasn't a passing stranger at all, but a local who knew these woods intimately. With the evidence of foul play now undeniable, the focus shifted to finding the person responsible. Detectives tried to reconstruct the Cowden family's final hours. They theorized that on that Sunday morning, shortly after Richard and David returned with the milk, the family encountered their killer. Perhaps as they prepared to go for a midday swim, an armed stranger approached the campsite. It appeared the Cowdens were taken by surprise and forced to comply under threat of a weapon. Investigators believe the family was likely made to leave the campsite with their abductor. The undisturbed scene indicated no struggle occurred there. Lieutenant Kazar speculated the family might have been herded into the killer's vehicle and driven elsewhere. This would explain why nothing at the site was disturbed. Richard and Belinda wouldn't risk a fight with their children in danger. Instead, they likely obeyed the gunman's commands, desperate to keep their kids safe. At some point, the Cowdens were led up that remote hillside where their bodies were later found. The steep, off-trail location was not easy to reach, suggesting the killer knew the terrain. There, far from any other campers, the murderer carried out the executions. It's possible Richard was kept alive a little longer. The rope around his torso suggests he was restrained, perhaps forced to watch or rendered helpless while his family was killed. Ultimately, he too was killed and left tied to that tree. As gruesome as that scenario was, it gave investigators a framework. Now the question loomed: who could have done such a thing? One early tip offered a chilling clue from the campground itself. A vacationing family from Los Angeles had been in the area on the evening of September 1st. They later told police that around 5 p.m. as they strolled near Carberry Creek, they noticed two men and a woman sitting in a faded pickup truck, watching them intently. They acted like they were waiting for us to leave, the father from Los Angeles recalled. Unnerved, he and his family quickly moved on and left the campground. At the time, it seemed odd but not overtly threatening. Only later, after the Cowdens were reported missing, did that strange encounter take on a far more sinister cast. Based on that report, investigators suspected that the three individuals in the truck could be connected to the crime, and a likely suspect soon emerged. Suspicion centered on a 25-year-old local man named Dwayne Lee Little. Little lived not far from Copper, and he had a violent history. At age 16, he had been convicted of sexually assaulting and murdering a teenage girl in 1964. After serving several years in prison, Little had been paroled in May 1974, just 3 months before the Cowden family's trip. Little's presence in the area during the Labor Day weekend in 1974 was well documented. In fact, he was with his parents that weekend, and the three of them had been driving around the Applegate area in a pickup truck. A miner who owned a nearby cabin later recalled that on Monday, September 2nd, the day after the Cowdens vanished, Dwayne Little and his parents stopped by and signed the guest log he kept for visitors. This placed Little in the vicinity during the critical time frame. As investigators dug deeper, more circumstantial evidence piled up. Little's girlfriend informed police that she had seen him in possession of a .22 caliber rifle in late 1974, a violation of his parole and notably the same caliber weapon used in the Cowden murders. Acting on this, authorities had revoked Little's parole in January 1975 and sent him back to prison on the felony firearm charge. It was an uncanny coincidence. By the time the Cowden family's bodies were discovered that April, Little was already behind bars. Years later, additional testimony came out from behind the prison walls. An inmate who had shared a cell with Dwayne Little claimed that Little confessed to murdering the Cowden family, describing details of the crime that had never been publicized. It was a disturbing yet uncorroborated admission. Law enforcement now had a suspect in a mountain of circumstantial evidence, but still no definitive proof. Despite their strong suspicions, prosecutors did not have enough to charge Little with the Cowden murders. To this day, Dwayne Lee Little has never been formally charged in the Cowden case. He remains incarcerated for other crimes. In 1980, while on parole yet again, Little savagely assaulted a pregnant woman who barely survived. That attack earned him multiple life sentences, ensuring he will never again walk free. Many in Oregon's law enforcement community privately believe that Little was indeed the one who slaughtered the Cowden family, but officially, the murders are unresolved and no one has ever been held accountable for them. There is one haunting detail that remains. After the bodies were found, a local man who had volunteered in the original search came forward with a startling recollection. Back in late September 1974, during the initial hunt for the family, he had personally explored the very cave where Belinda and the children were eventually found, and he swore that it was empty at that time. To verify his claim, police had him lead them to the exact spot. Indeed, it was the same cave. If his memory was accurate, it means the killer might have moved the bodies into the cave weeks or months after the murders, perhaps once the area was less closely watched. For the Cowden family's surviving relatives, the discovery brought devastating closure but no justice. They buried their loved ones without knowing why this happened or who was responsible. In the years after, the campsite at Carberry Creek changed forever as well. The valley was flooded in the late 1970s during the creation of Applegate Lake, submerging the town of Copper and the surrounding areas. The place where the Cowdens spent their last days, fishing, playing, and smiling in the sunshine, now lies under dozens of feet of water. Yet the story of the Cowden family has not been forgotten. It lives in Oregon lore as one of the most haunting unsolved crimes in the state's history. Generations of locals have grown up hearing about the young family that went camping and never came home. Campers in the Siskiyou Mountains still talk about it around their campfires, sharing the story of a beautiful place suddenly touched by horror. In the end, the case file still sits open but gathering dust decades later. The Siskiyou Mountains keep their secrets well. Somewhere beneath those whispering pines and along Carberry Creek, the echo of that Labor Day weekend in 1974 still lives. It's a reminder that evil can lurk even in the most serene places, striking without warning and leaving behind a mystery that time has yet to solve.